Sung Jinwoo is the most important hunter for you to build in solo leveling Arise, especially with him now having new blessing stones and transcendent runes. And starting off, let's talk about your Jinwoo's best artifact builds, and he has two very good ones which you can use, with the very first one still being the 4-set effect of Burning Curse, as well as also pairing it with the 4-set effect of the Expert sets. So this build is going to be best for Jinwoo, especially in long drawn out fights like your Workshop of Brilliant Lights runs, because what you can get from Burning Curse is up to a 30% damage increase, which is very, very powerful. But as well with the Expert set, when you do land a critical hit, you can have a 50% chance to increase your own attack by 1.6%, stacking up to 100 times, which in total can give you a 160% increase into your Jinwoo's attack. The second build is then going to be very similar to the first, because again, you'll be using the 4-set effect of Burning Curse. However, this time, as opposed to using the Expert set, we'll be using the Outstanding Ability set for its 60% damage increase that it does apply, making this his best build for shorter fights. Artifact main stats are up next, and for your Jinwoo's helmet, his gloves, and also his ring, additional attack will be your best main stat option, but also attack percent can work just fine. And as well, the only other two important main stats you're going to want to prioritize are going to be for your Jinwoo's bracelet and also for his boots, because for the likes of his boot main stat, you will want to easily and always just go for critical hit damage, because this will give you a huge amount of power and also the biggest amount of damage increase. But then for his bracelet main stat, it is very different, because it does heavily depend on what you are currently using your Jinwoo for, so you can literally use all of the different elemental damage increases, but obviously you want to change it depending on what piece of content you're playing. Also, with the vast majority of your Jinwoo's skills and damage scaling off of his attack stat, it does also mean for your substats you definitely will want to prioritize additional attack and also attack percent, whilst at the same time getting your critical hit rate to at least 50%, but you will definitely want some surplus critical hit rate, which is because when you are taking on really difficult content like the current Yogaman's Workshop of Brilliant Light, these bosses do have sort of a hidden inbuilt critical resistance, so you are definitely going to want to have some extra surplus critical hit rate to make up for that. But following critical hit rate, of course, critical hit damage to around 200% is a very, very good mark for your Jinwoo to be at, and then for the rest of your stats, pretty much defense pen and damage increase are going to be the last two main important stats for your Sung Jinwoo. Another extremely important part of building your Sung Jinwoo is going to be his stat point investment, because you have 5 different stats that you can invest points into to make your Jinwoo much stronger, being strength, vitality, agility, intelligence, and perception. So then as for what actually is Jinwoo's best stat build, there really isn't one definitive best build, because there is many different ways of you allocating these points properly, because you have stuff like a full strength build which invests in getting as much attack as possible. You have a mix of both strength and also intelligence, which is great when using the Intuit Blessing Stone and is best for content like Guild Boss for its cooldown reduction. You then now have the new stat build of building your Jinwoo with strength, agility, and intelligence, but this is only for when you are using the Intuit and the new Lightning Speed Blessing Stone. And finally, for when your precision is pretty low, you can have a stat build that mixes both strength and perception to get to 99% precision. Not much has really changed when it does come to your Sung Jinwoo's very best cores, because the Ancient Wraith's Obsession, Right Hand, and also the Mana Power are all still going to be his very best options. However, you can now change out the Ancient Wraith's Mana Power for Teeth of the Watcher if you are struggling with mana points. But what has changed a little bit is going to be your main stats for your cores, because with your Mind Piece on your Ancient Wraith's Obsession, you will want to go for attack percent, because that will now give you a bigger attack increase, but for the rest, like your body and also your Spirit Piece, additional defense and HP will be the best. And then for your substats, you want to prioritize pretty much just what your Jinwoo is missing, being either damage increase, critical hit damage, or defense penetration. So next up, I want to talk about all of your Sung Jinwoo's very best weapons, and mainly his best weapon combinations for every element. And starting off, we have the water element, and this has received a brand new weapon, being the Winterfang Scythe, which is a very, very high damage outputting weapon, simply because of all of the buffs that it can apply to yourself, and also the debuffs that you can apply to your enemy with it. And then when you do combine that weapon with the Phaetus' Grimoire, you can also apply another debuff, which can help increase your elemental weakness damage dealt to your enemies, which makes this the perfect weapon combination for the water element. For the wind element, the two best weapons are going to be your Demon King's Daggers for all of the huge amount of skill damage that it does provide, as well as also Stormbringer, which is mainly going to be for its debuffs that it does have. The fire element is up next, and the best weapon setup for Jinwoo is going to be the Phoenix Soul Bow, because of all of the huge amount of extra core attack damage that it does give. And this will be your main DPS weapon, followed up by the Fan of the Fire Demon, which is the perfect weapon to help support the Phoenix Soul because of the buffs that it does have. Onto the light setup, and the Divine Quarterstaff is by far the best DPS weapon for your Sung Jinwoo when it does come to the light elements, and this is simply just going to be because of the mana power concentration buff it does have, which can increase its own skill damage by up to 500%. And then for the supportive weapon for the light element, you can either go for the gold-tailed fox for its debuff that it does apply, or you could go for something like the huntsman for when you are facing enemies that do need to be broken quite a lot, which then finally does leave the dark element and still the demonic plum flower sword for all of its crit damage bonuses, as well as also moon shadow for its very powerful debuffs, increasing damage and also dark damage taken, are both still going to be your best weapons for the dark elements, because when you pair it up with magnifying slashes, your Jinwoo can do an incredible amount of damage. And speaking of magnifying slashes, let's talk about all of your Sung Jinwoo's very best skills, with the first one of course being Sonic Stream, which has 4 fantastic runes, especially like I mentioned before, with magnifying slashes being the dark element rune. Armor break is another fantastic skill as well, because stuff like vacuum wave is amazing for literally any piece of content in the entire game for its damage increasing debuff it does apply for 12 seconds. And you also have other amazing skills like dagger rush for its amazing runes like dispersion, which have almighty break damage and also a very good amount of just general damage. The commander's touch, and especially runes like liberation, which can increase your Jinwoo's attack, is very powerful for stuff like Battlefield of Time. Death Stance is very good because it has strong runes such as Earth Shock and especially high speed rotation with the Stormbringer weapon. And then finally, some other really good skills you have are going to be Electric Shock and also Detonation from Dagger Toss, as well as all 4 of the runes from Vertical Arts, and even stuff like Annihilation, Effulgence, and Sunder are also all pretty decent from Cutting Brush. When it comes to your Sung Jinwoo's very best Blessing Stones, and mainly for his empowerment ones, the 3 best Blessing Stones for him that you use pretty much everywhere are going to be the likes of Bloodlust, Sharp Perception, and finally Reawakening. This is because all of these runes are usable across every piece of content in the entire game with your Jinwoo, because stuff like Bloodlust decreasing your enemy's defense by up to 14% is going to be very powerful for your point scoring game modes. Sharp Perception being able to increase your Jinwoo's crit rate by up to 24.5% is fantastic for endgame content like WOBL. And finally, Reawakening being able to decrease all of your skill cooldowns by up to 24% is going to give you your Jinwoo a huge amount of extra damage. And of course, all of these other Blessing Stones are also fantastic. But for your survival Blessing Stones, it doesn't really matter too much which ones you want to go for. However, I would definitely strongly recommend that you do go for ones like Life and also Aggressive Defense, because these all do give your Jinwoo a shield, so then you can run a supportive hunter with the Guardian set with your Jinwoo. Another very important thing in increasing the amount of damage that your Sung Jinwoo can do is going to be using and equipping the right supportive hunters and their support skills, because when you are using support skills from the likes of Goto Ryuji and also Sorin, they can provide a huge amount of extra damage increases, but also break damage, which is very important with your Jinwoo. But finally, the most important types of support skills are going to be your buffers and also debuffers, which does include the likes of Shimizu Akari, Isla Wright, Maylene Fisher, Lee Bora, Min Byung-gu are pretty much all of the main ones that people do mainly use. So then finally, let's talk about all of your Sung Jinwoo's best shadow formations. And for me personally, pretty much for the majority of content that I'm playing with Jinwoo, I do always like to go for Igris for his up to 8% increase in critical hit rate as my authority leader. But for other content where critting is very easy, Beru is also a fantastic authority leader for his attack and crit damage increases, followed up by Bestie for her defense penetration increase for very hard difficult content, which does leave the supportive shadows. And as always, Serbi the Cerberus is always going to be there for the combustion debuff, which will then be followed up by either using the new Ice Witch Bestie for her defense penetration increase that she does give, or you could go for Beru for his punishment debuff. So there you have it, that is a full and completed build guide for Sung Jinwoo. And overall, if you did enjoy this video or you just found it useful in general, then don't forget to like and subscribe, and as always, I will see you all in the next video. Peace!